Today we'll be learning about points, lines, and planes. In this lesson, we will be identifying relationships that exist between points, lines, and planes. So, there are three undefined terms in geometry, are point, line, and plane. A point is a location. It is a dot on a graph. It has no size, it cannot be measured. In the picture on the board, you will see we have point A and point B. These 2 points are labeled with capital letters A and B. You'll notice we have a few different ways we can name points. The first is we could use the word point, then the capital letter A, or we could use the abbreviation, which would be PT, or we could just use the capital letter A. We never use lowercase letters when we're talking about points. The letters we use, however, could be any letter that we choose. In this case, it's point A and point B. A line. A line is a straight figure made up of points. Similar to a point, a line cannot be measured. It has no thickness and it has no width. In the picture you see here, we have the red line drawn on the paper. You'll notice that red line has arrows on the end of it. These arrows are very important. Lines will always have arrows on the end of them. You'll also notice that the line has a lowercase m on the end of it, and it is in italics. This again is very specific to a line. It can be any letter, but they are written in lowercase and in cursive. We also have the points C, D, and E on our line. We could have an infinite number of points on our line, but in order to make a line, we must have at least 2 points. When naming a line, we have quite a few different ways of doing it. First, we could call this line CE. Notice again, it is a line with arrows on the end of it for its label. We could also call it line ED. We could even use line M. Lastly, but least common, we could just write down M in italics. When it is written like that, it does mean line M, but it is not used very commonly. One other important part about naming lines is the order of the letters is not important. We could call it line CE, or we could have called it line EC. That means the exact same line. And also you'll notice we never use 3 letters. Our next term is plane. A plane is a flat surface made up of points. A plane has no depth and it extends infinitely in all directions. It is very similar to a sheet of paper, a floor, a wall, a desktop. Those all represent planes, but they aren't perfect in the sense of all those objects end. A plane never ends. A plane goes on forever in all directions. When we name a plane, we have 2 ways we do it. The first way is we write the word plane, and then we use any 3 letters that are not, 3 points that cannot be connected by a line. If I were to try and connect F, G, and H, you'll notice I would have to make that turn. That is not a line. When we play dot to dot, that would be considered a line, but that's not how it is in math. A line never ever bends. So we can use those 3 dots because they cannot be connected. So we could call it plane F, GH, or we could use GHF or HGF, so on and so forth. You can use them in any order that you choose. Now in the top right hand corner of this plane, you will also recognize that cursive or italic looking P. That is another way to name a plane, but it is less common. In that case, we would just use the word plane and that cursive or italic letter P. We never ever mix our italic letters with our points when naming anything. We don't use the lowercase ones like with a line. We never use the M along with the E, so we would not say E M. We would never ever do that. That is absolutely wrong. Similarly, we would never mix the cursive P along with the G or H or any other combination of three. It is not a point. So if we were going to use the italic P, it would be used by itself. So there's a brief description of our three undefined terms in geometry. These are kind of like the building blocks of geometry. Point, line, and plane. Our next term is space. Space is exactly what you think of. It is a boundless, three-dimensional set of all points. Think of outer space with all the stars. Those stars are not connected. They're a bit randomly spread out amongst the galaxy. Space is often described as being air. You will notice with this first lesson there is a lot of definitions, so be careful to be writing down all these definitions. Next is collinear. We will be using this word a lot, so if you're not sure what it means, make sure to ask. Collinear is simply points on the same line. In this case, we have the three blue dots. They are collinear even though we cannot see the line. I've now displayed the line, and it does indeed connect all three dots. Non-collinear then would be points not on the same line. In this picture below, we have two red dots. I just now displayed the green dot. There would be no way for me to draw a line, often referred to as a straight line, that would connect the first dot, the second dot, and include the third dot. It indeed misses it. So we would call that non-collinear, meaning not all on the same line. Next is coplanar. Coplanar are figures or objects on the same plane. In this plane in our picture, we have a point, another point, another point, and a line. All of those objects would be coplanar. They are all on the same plane. Now, if I were to draw a line, that also looks like it's coplanar. But if we make the bottom half of that line dotted, that represents a line that is actually going through the plane. That would be considered non-coplanar. Non-coplanar means not in the same plane. Next is parallel lines. Parallel lines are coplanar lines that never intersect. Just like our picture here of the railroad tracks are coplanar lines. If you look at the lines whenever you're in class for the tiles on the floor or the tiles on the ceiling, those are parallel lines. They are coplanar lines that never intersect. Similarly to parallel lines, we have parallel planes. Parallel planes are two planes that never intersect. Think of the floor and the ceiling. Skew lines. This one gets to be a little more tricky. All the words up until now you may have heard before or are fairly easily understood. Skew lines are a little more challenging. The two pictures on the board here really help to describe skew lines. First off, noncoplanar, meaning lines not in the same plane, that never intersect. So on the cube, I could use AB, and I could use HG. They look like I've drawn them to cross each other. However, if you were to grab a box of Kleenex and color in that top edge and then color in the back edge, you would see that those lines never cross. They would be called skew. If you look at this nut here, this also shows two skew lines. The red line on the bottom of the nut and the diagonal line on the side of the nut. Those would be skew lines. They are never going to touch each other, but they are definitely not parallel. Take a few moments. Think about, are there skew lines in this classroom? Or if you're at home, are there skew lines around your computer? I bet you if you take a moment, you could find examples of points, lines, planes, collinear, non-collinear, parallel lines, parallel planes, and skew lines without looking very far. That is the end of today's lesson. Make sure to stop in and ask if you have any questions about what I talked about today.